welcome to Saptarishis Astrology channel, and I'm Vinayak Bhatt, and today we have a very special guest with us one more time. So, welcome Shri Gary Gomes ji. Namaste.
Thank you, Vinayak. And let me
Today's
see
topic
now.
is how to use multiple Vargas and Dashas. So, this is a kind of a topic which is very required in our Vedic Jyotish. So, today Gary Gomes will teach us like how to use this multiple Vargas and what are those Vargas and how to use with the Dashas. These things we will learn today. Okay, sir. So if you are ready, then we can start the presentation.
I'm just trying to get the. There we go. Okay.
Yes.
All right. So it's on full screen, and I don't include sample charts in the presentation slides themselves. So we're going to switch to those afterwards.
Okay.
All right. All right. So essentially, this lecture goes at least to demonstrate to an astrologer how they can use multiple dashas and Vargas in chart interpretation. And this is essentially a combination of what I've read, what I've discovered over time, and also what I've applied successfully. So it isn't, it isn't the final discussion on this topic. I don't think there ever will be a final discussion on this particular topic, but it can at least provide an astrologer with some useful hints as to how to approach a chart. Okay. Excuse me. I was up a little late last night putting this together. All right. So first of all, we want to look at the various ways in which dashas are calculated. The most popular way to calculate dashas is from the lunar mansions. That's the one that everyone's most familiar with. And so, and again, I've lectured on this before. The lunar mansions are actually represent a progression of the moon through nakshatras. So essentially, I'll just use my chart as a quick example. If I were born a few hours earlier, my moon wouldn't be in Saptarishis Nakshatra. It would be in the Nakshatra after that. If I were born like about a day later, it would be in Revati Nakshatra. Or 2 days later, it would be in Revati Nakshatra. So those Mahadashas or those nakshatras are essentially the ground that I will be exploring during my lifetime. So essentially, even if one planet is located all the way across the chart, 7 houses away, eight houses away, I'm still going to be exploring that particular area of life through the lens of where the planet is placed. Okay, so both nakshatras will figure into influences in my life. Both the planetary placement and the nakshatra will figure into my experience in my life. Okay, so you have to look at the nakshatra in which the moon is placed because that's the start of life. These lunar-based dashas give a journey of life from the time our minds and senses all manifest from the time we leave our mother's womb, and these are all lunar expressions anyway. Okay, so these are all moon-based expressions. Vimshotri, Ashtotri, Shadshotri, Dvisaptati, Sama, and Shatabdika Dasha are all nakshatra dashas, but are all based on certain conditions being met in the birth chart. Although Vimshotri is often used as a universal dasha. Okay, so essentially, there are supposed to be certain rules for using Vimshotri versus Ashtotri, but most astrologers just ignore those and just go ahead and use Vimshotri as a universal Mahadasha. I don't think that's entirely wrong. I don't think it's bad practice to use Vimshotri, but that also brings into mind the idea that you would double check a Mahadasha against another Mahadasha just to make sure you're getting the right information. Yogini is exceptional in that it can be applied to any chart regardless of the conditions being met. It is the Shakti of the nakshatras. I like to view this being the Shakti of the nakshatras, the energy directing the person rather than the environment. So essentially, when we look at Yogini, we're looking at really what's a motivating cause for the person during that Mahadasha. So again, let's say if a person's in a Venus Mahadasha, they'll be interested in art, beauty, financial security, things like that. They'll also be interested in learning. Venus is a guru nakshatra. It's a guru planet after all. If they're in, let's say, Ketu, they'll be interested in spiritual liberation, or in a Ketu influence nakshatra. If they're in Saturn, they'll be interested in working more and thinking less. Okay, so it doesn't mean Saturn's anti-intellectual, but it really won't try to acquire any knowledge that it can't use practically. So there's not a great deal of interest in, let's say, in philosophy during a Saturn Mahadasha. So all these things tend to work as sort of a confluence of influences from the nakshatra dashas. And also you can actually apply things like the chara dasha indicators, although some people don't like that. I have met astrologers who don't like that. So essentially the chara karakas or the atma karaka through the dara karaka. And those can actually they'll give certain dimensions of those karakas. Okay, so let's say if Mars is your atma karaka or Jupiter is your atma karaka, during those periods, those traits which are more like you will manifest. Okay, so it'll be more attention and focus on the things that you want in life. If you're in the Mahadasha of a dark Karaka, you'll be focused more on things that other people want from you in your life. Okay, so let's say Saturn is your dark Karaka, so your bosses may want you to work more, or your guru may want you to do more service. If you're in Jupiter, let's say Jupiter's a home Mahadasha, you'll have nice homes, nice educational opportunities, those kinds of things, depending, of course, on Jupiter's state in the chart. Okay, so those are the analytics behind the Mahadasha sequences. But all those things will be stressed to a greater or lesser extent during a Mahadasha and Nakshatra Dasha. And so sign-based nakshatras, actually sign-based nakshatras, sign-based Mahadashas, my apologies. These are calculated usually from the lagna, at least in the chart. The Sudarshan Dasha essentially combines all three lagnas and points to the general direction of the chart's focus: health, first house; family, second house; siblings, ambitions, third house, etc. So let's say you're in a 12th house Mahadasha, or a 6th house Mahadasha. That'll be a transformative Mahadasha for your life. Okay, those kinds of Mahadashas will cause shifts. So like the 3rd, 6th, 9, and 12 Advisha signs, so those particular houses will produce changes for a person. Okay, action-oriented Mahadashas will be 4th, 10th, 1st, and 7th, and educationally based Mahadashas will be again 4th, 5th, and 9th. Okay, basically, and all these Mahadashas will have various effects on the person's life. So let's say the dark Karaka is located in the sign connected with work, or has something to do with work. then the person will meet their spouse in the workplace. If a person has, let's say, Mars as a Mars occupied Mahadasha, that person will acquire property during that Mahadasha. So all these things, even Mercury will acquire property. So all these things will tend to, and also you can also have 12th house Mahadasha and not have any major losses, but have changes in orientation or foreign travel or 9th house Mahadasha. You know, all these things tend to work. So it's not necessarily a superficial reading that you're going to lose everything when you enter a 12th house Mahadasha. That's not the case, although there tend to be expenses during that Mahadasha. Essentially, but you will become almost hermit-like, or you'll be alone a lot, or you'll be kind of isolated. Chara, okay, and so this is one of the easiest dashas to calculate, because essentially it's a 1 through 12 Mahadasha. It starts with the first year when you're born, and by the time you're 12 years old, you've gone through all your houses, right? And I think it's interesting that a lot of major changes in life happen around 12, 24, 36, 48 years of age, 60 years of age. K.N. Rao once said a man's greatest power or greatest maturity is around the age of 60. That's 5 cycles of, and that's also connected with 5 is also connected with Mercury, which is a career indicating planet. So that's essentially, it's not necessarily the peak of a person's career, but when they've essentially gained enough wisdom to apply it. So I'll get back from that digression. But this is one of the most slippery to interpret correctly, because you're looking at all aspects of your life, your soul, your mind, and your body going through major changes during each of these periods. The Chara, Kala Chakra, and Narayana Dasha are calculated according to house, and in calculating Kala Chakra Dasha from Nakshatra. However, Chara, Narayana, and conditional dashas used in Germany like Shula, Stira, and Manduk Dasha can employ nakshatras for interpretation, especially when using the 7 Chara Karakas. So let me just go on to the next page. Other Dasha related systems. Planetary maturity is a type of a Dasha system. I found like startlingly good results whenever I use planetary maturity, especially in relationship matters in charts, especially in educational matters in charts, especially in career matters in charts. There are 2 of these systems. One is referenced in Brihad Jataka, which I don't use all that much. It's a very interesting system, and there's a certain amount of truth to it. So essentially, I'm in my Sun Brihad Jataka Mahadasha right now, which makes sense given my chart. But also, the Parashara planetary maturities tend to manifest different things. So Jupiter matures at age 16 when we're looking for groups to belong to, Sun at age 21 when we're looking to make our mark in the world, Moon at age 23 when we're thinking about security and family, Venus is at age 24 when we're thinking about luxuries and comforts, Mars at age 27 where we're thinking about making our actual mark in the world or getting serious about career, Mercury at age 32 when career maturity seems to have been boisterous, Saturn at age 34 when we're sort of settled into a career, Rahu at age 42 when we start to get a little bit dissatisfied and start questioning our life's direction, and Ketu at age 48 when we either don't care or we've decided on a spiritual direction. Karaka dashas are calculated in sequence from Atma Karaka to Dara Karaka, and are counted from the ascendant to the placement of the planet in the chart to determine the length of these dashas. For example, individuals with several planets in the 12th house will have very long periods of time during which a Karaka dasha will last. Second house planets will experience changes kind of rapidly. They'll experience changes in kind of a rapid fire fashion. Vargas interpretation. Now we're going on to Vargas. So the key point to retain from the dasha is essentially there are numerous kinds of softwares out there you can use. You don't have to use every single one of these dashas. For wealth and prosperity, Sudasha is supposed to be a really good dasha to use. But some softwares don't have that. So you can sort of but that dasha is relatively easy to calculate by hand. It's not really a very difficult mahadasha. But again, it's a little bit easier, especially if you're doing chart interpretations, to use what you have in front of you. The Vargas, but going back to the Vargas can also color our interpretations of a mahadasha sequence. Okay, so the most important Vargas, at least to my mind, that matter in day-to-day life are the D1, the D9. The D9 is obviously the Navamsha, the D10, the Dastamsha, the D7, the Saptarishis, which is not only children, but also business relationships. The D12, which is essentially family and status, and the D60, which is the general luck in the chart. So 60. The D60 I like to look at as the obstacles we have to overcome in a chart. Essentially the things in life which are difficult for us or are easier for us. And it's interesting because when I look at things like Maheshvara, which is one of the indicators of that's applied to the D60 chart. It's one of the deities applied to the D60 chart. That's Shiva. That's going to indicate change in a person's life. Okay. It's generally auspicious, but it's not. It doesn't necessarily mean it's not disruptive. So essentially, there'll be a lot of changes during that mahadasha, during the mahadasha of, let's say, a planet which is Maheshvara, a lot of pain in certain other combinations. So we're not going to delve very deeply into that because I'm not equipped in this presentation to do that. But those are significant. Those should be studied more, and the D60 is one of the toughest charts to trust. Number one, because the birth time has to be incredibly accurate, and number two, because you could read negatives into it where positives are actually occurring, and vice versa. So essentially, just because there are struggles in life doesn't mean the life isn't good. Okay, so I think that sometimes the disposition of sometimes the mistake that we make is both people reading charts and people having charts read for us is we'll look at an upcoming mahadasha or change or transit and say, oh, this is going to be a difficult period. And that period may actually produce the most growth and the most opportunities for success of any mahadasha that you're entering, because it'll test you, it'll push you to your limits, it'll let you know exactly what you can do. Saturn dashas and Saturn transits are generally not necessarily, Saturn dashas aren't necessarily feared, but they're seen as being limiting. But without limits, how can you assess your potential? Without limits, how can you assess your growth? So and sometimes people with easy nakshatras or easy planets tend to have more trouble than people with difficult planets because they're not tough. they're or they haven't encountered a lot of obstacles, so they just get a little bit. They don't challenge themselves. They don't, everything's going fairly smoothly. They don't challenge themselves. They don't. And the astrologer just says, "Oh, this is going to be a horrible period for you. Don't try." It's just, and I'm not saying every astrologer does that, but I've seen a lot of astrologers do that. And essentially, the point is to try. So at least from my perspective, you were sent here to you were reincarnated to learn. You were reincarnated to learn to get things right. Some of that involves resignation, obviously, resignation or acceptance. But some of that also involves effort. Okay, so there can be no growth without effort, and sometimes that involves acceptance. Sometimes that involves having to go to the gym and lift some weights, or struggling in a storm. Okay, except for Narayana Dasha or Padkrama Dasha, as I've seen it referred to in some texts, there is no mandate in the classical text for calculating different dashas for different Vargas charts. And I sometimes question the basis for this in Germany. It's not because I think it's wrong. It's just that I think it's odd that particular dasha is singled out. But every teacher has reasons for doing so, and this teaching is undoubtedly a hand-down tradition. So I'm not criticizing it. It's just sort of like out there by itself. Why not charadashas? Why not? Why not? And I think the nakshatra-based dashas, I can understand why, because the nakshatras shift around a lot as you go from harmonic chart to harmonic chart. So they start to get really unreliable if you're using that as a basis to calculate mahadashas. And no, at least one classical text indicates Vimshottari dashas can be calculated from the lagna, and Sujataka Parijata indicates that the Vimshottari dashas can be calculated from the lagna and other points in the chart. So I have actually looked at those in different charts, and they actually do work relatively well. The moon is the primary point of reference, obviously, but let's say you're examining your educational life, and you want to look at the Mahadasha or the nakshatra that Jupiter is placed in, and look at the sequence of Mahadashas from that. And you can actually get above and beyond a simple explanation. You can actually find the kinds of things you're learning as you go through these different nakshatras. So, okay. So again, like I said, it's a little bit beyond what we're talking about right here, but that's one way you can apply them. Okay.
So I have two questions here.
Sure.
Can I ask it?
Yes, of course.
So like we are talking about Vargas. Okay, so Varga means the divisions. Okay.
Yes.
So is it divisions of signs or houses? If it's signs, then is it good idea to consider divisional Vargas as a complete chart itself? Because chart means we have to consider houses also.
Yep.
So is it good idea to consider it as a house, complete chart, or it's just a division of signs?
I usually consider the only point at which, okay, I tend to view them equivalently. That was the bias that I was that I was taught. If you get up to let's say northern India, or if you do things like the Bhavi Chalita chart, then you can have planets ending up in different houses than they do in signs. But I find this is already a complicated system. Number one, there's already a great deal of depth to it. Number one, and I think you can get a little bit. So let's say if you go into Krishnamurti Padati and you use Placidus house system, that's great. That's how that system was set up.
Hmm.
Um, uh, and and sometimes if you go to see things like Kala Chakra Dasha, you might want to use a North Indian reference point like Sri Pati.
Hmm.
But 90% of the time, I think sign equal house works best.
Okay.
Just in general use.
Yeah.
All right, all right. So does that help? Is that helpful?
Yes. 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 Yes.
Yes. So again, there are a lot of moving parts in Vedic astrology. We haven't even spoken about the Upagrahas and how they can
Correct,
affect
correct.
it,
Like
and
like
astrology of
many a
Varga.
time, like many a times, I have another doubt. Like in the first slide, we are talking about the dasha based on the nakshatras. Okay.
That's right.
So when we talk about nakshatras, so when we calculate Vimshotri dasha, so their lordship for nakshatra is different.
Yes, exactly.
Ashwini,
So
Ashwini is
yeah,
ruled by Ketu. But in Ashtotri Dasha, it changes. So Ashwini is ruled by Rahu, I think, if I'm correct. I'm not remembering exactly. So
yeah,
there Ashwini is ruling by Rahu and here Ketu. So it means this nakshatra allotment of planets for the nakshatra is not fixed here.
yeah, yeah. But you can see how Ashwini can be both Rahu and Ketu, okay, or Ketu and Rahu, because essentially it's the two physicians that give that help an old man get reborn.
Yeah.
So that liberates him from his burdens. That wipes out his past life karmas. But at the same time, the entire idea of essentially wiping out your entire history is pretty much a Rahu-based concept. So he wants to be able to please his young wife. So is that really a spiritual dimension to Ashvini? Is it? I'm not saying it isn't.
Yes.
Because that's his karma. At but but at the same time, Ashvini has this very kind of, and every nakshatra has good points and bad points to it. So Rohini is considered really, really good, but
Mhm.
it can also be very sensual and and very and and clingy and greedy. So it's not so none of these nakshatras is a perfect state of existence. Okay.
Correct.
They're essentially states of mind, and I'm a firm believer, and it could be because I'm a Westerner. I don't know, but I don't. But actually, from what I've studied in yoga is about controlling the mind too. So essentially, we have the responsibility to control our minds, to control, because we're gonna have these things where we can fall flat on our face horribly, or these things where we can lift ourselves up to great things.
Correct.
Pablo Picasso, the painter, had like the worst chart I've ever seen in terms of debilitated planets, in terms of, it's just a horrible chart. But he was a very successful man. His relationship life was a disaster, but he had multiple. He was Mr. Ashford. He actually has several younger wives. And I'm not saying that's a good or a bad thing. I'm not judging. I'm not judging him. I'm just saying that's the karma that he faced. So it's so there's this enormous talent and these enormous struggles. He was an orphan. So you have these enormous struggles, but you also have these very, very strong other traits that come forward. So even from the birth chart, you're faced with all these challenges and temptations and opportunities. Okay, so yeah, all right. So did Interpretational principles I usually follow are look at the chart using an appropriate nakshatra-based dasha as a reference point for interpretation of the sequence of nakshatra-based dashas. Harmonic charts will be derived from this point anyways. So while one can use nakshatras and harmonic charts, it gets more and more granular and confusing to use them to determine mahadashas. It's just not practical. Remember, nakshatra starting points do give a sequence of life events from birth, so they are the environments the individual will encounter. Use a sign-based dasha to check or combine the results, and don't ignore nakshatra placements of the planets and signs. So just because you're going into a system like Jyotish, which has different rules for yogas, it doesn't mean you ignore the nakshatras. The nakshatras are still important in Jyotish astrology. Apply to predicting life events and insert transits and Saurashtriga Varga assessments of transits and natal planets to fine-tune the prediction. Look to see repeating patterns in Varga charts as a way of confirming or modifying the prediction. For example, in career matters, look at 10th and 7th houses and the D10 and D7 house charts and Amatya and Matri Karaka position planets and placements. The reason I include Matri Karaka is because that's position in life, that's status in life, as well as education and a mother. This can give you an incredible amount of detail if undertaken carefully and logically. As a matter of fact, I often find myself looking, let me go backwards, looking at Matri Karaka planets for when occupational changes will occur, as opposed to Amitya Karaka planets. Jyotish is a system based on internal rules of logic. The amount of detail it can generate can seem chaotic, but not to the calm or optimistic individual. There are always opportunities of success if we understand the logic of the chart. Now, certain things are going to be overwhelming combinations. So certain things, so let's say if a person has a variety of negative factors or a variety of positive factors all coming together at the same time, those are going to prove to be massively disruptive events, including things like death, or major diseases or major triumphs. But essentially, nobody gets an eternal guarantee of existence. Maybe the only comfort we get is I've looked at several charts of deceased personalities and see that their dashas still seem to be operating. At least in terms of public perception. So if you look at a person like, let's say, Gandhi or Churchill or Einstein or even celebrities, you'll see that the public perception of their life continues even after they pass. Okay, so these are like big charts. These are big individuals. Most people are forgotten about after they pass away, but we still remember a person like Beethoven, like close to 300 years after his death. So let me get out of this, and we'll go to some charts. Okay.
Okay.
If I can. And I never, when I do these, I never prepare charts in advance.
Also, you have mentioned one interesting point in your presentation, like you can calculate Dasha from position of moon as well as from the different points.
Yep.
So I have checked it. But there's a feature in Parashara Light software. So there you can change the point from where to calculate the Vimshotri Dasha. So that works.
Yep. Oh yeah. And again, it'll work for various significations. So let's say, let's say Jupiter is a more prominent planet in your chart than the moon is. Or the sun is a more prominent planet. So let's say you have a really weak moon. The moon is new. You probably want to calculate from the sun as opposed to the moon.
Because I can give you one reference from the classical. If you read Jatak Satyacharya, Jatak
Oh,
Satyachara
okay.
is a classical book which is
Yep.
older than the Brihat Jatak. So
Yep.
there,
Oh,
Satyacharya author, he says, I think it's the first chapter or second chapter, I'm not exactly sure. So there he say you can calculate dasha from moon as well as from sun, as well as from
yep.
your ascendant also, depending on the strength of these planets.
Yeah. I think a lot of the limitations, and I found myself doing this for years myself, is basically a lot of the limitations we put ourselves in terms of interpretational principles are self-imposed limitations. They're not limitations that are not allowed in the system. We just have to have the flexibility to apply them and see if they work and see if they don't.
Yes,
So it's essentially it's a big lap, and there's so much depth in Jyotish. So there are so many components you can use.
correct.
I actually think the rishis made it. You'll forgive the expression, idiot proof, because there are so many ways that you can get to the right information in a chart. I think the chart speaks to people basically, and with a sufficient amount of study, if you learn a language, you'll understand the language. And but some people learn it in different ways. Some people have to take Latin and Greek before they'll understand, before they'll read a classical text in a Western classical text. Other people can just sit down and understand the point without taking those languages. So it's clearly you'll get a richer background if you study it in the original language, but that doesn't mean your understanding is lessened. Okay, so all right, so if you can give me back to, okay, and so can I share now again?
Yes, you can share. You already have access to share the chart.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm not sure this is mine. If it's mine, I'm going to get rid of it. Yeah, this is mine.
Yeah,
So
it's visible.
all right, so I'm going to keep it simple. So I'm going to pull up a, whoops, I must have a window open somewhere. Hold on. Yes, I do. Let's get on this. All right. So let's go to um, a fairly well-known personality chart. I won't go to Bill Gates because there's some controversy over what the right rising sign is. All right. All right. All right. So Dwight D. Eisenhower was the president of the United States. He was also the commander of um, the Allied forces um, in in the European theater, commander in chief of the Allied forces in the European theater. And one of the interesting things about General Eisenhower is that he has a really strong Saturn in his chart. Okay, he's got Saturn in the first house in Leo. So, and again, this has come up several times over the past few days. Prominently placed Saturns tends to make people leaders. It's just really, it's almost like a given. Also, the Saturn Moon aspect that shows up in the chart, and let's see what his Karaka planet is. His Karaka planet is the Sun, so that's a leadership position as well. He's obviously a smart man because Mercury is exalted, right?
Correct.
All right. Now he's got a debilitated Jupiter. No obvious cancellation of this debilitation. So essentially, but Jupiter in Capricorn actually is a good position for government. It's not really a bad position for government. And also it'll give him some unconventional thinking. It's not he's not going to follow the line, essentially my country right or wrong, basically. But that Sun Mercury conjunction, so we're just looking at general tendencies. His moon's in Chitra Nakshatra, which is the building nakshatra. Okay. And so his entire life, he was born for war. Chitra is a Mars-based nakshatra. If you follow this now, so 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 essentially, and I have to see my glass off to look at this a little more carefully. Okay, so, all right. So Mars is 1890. He was born into it looks like 329. Moon is in Chitra, and this is a different Mahadasha that I have. Hold on. This is his Yogini Mahadasha. So let's look at his Vimshotri first
It's
of
the
all.
Yogini Dasha.
Yep. Yeah, well, let's look at Vimshotri first of all.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so Vimshotri starts with Mars. He starts in the Mars Mahadasha. In 1940, in 1926, that's his Saturn Mahadasha.
Yes.
That was when he came to prominence. Essentially, that was the entire period in which he gained power. Slowly, but he gained power. And one of the reasons that Eisenhower became the commander-in-chief of the Allied forces wasn't because he was such a great general. It was because he was diplomatic. He was able, so that moon in the third house helped him out a lot. He was able to work with a lot of different people. And he was able to, he was also politically astute. And that fed over into the presidential campaign of 1952. Interestingly, and again, this is United States politics. Saturn essentially, and he did have a good education. You know, at least I believe he was in West Point. But this Saturn Mahadasha showed his rise to power very clearly. You know, and it was somewhat competitive. Saturn rules the sixth and the seventh house, but it also involved working with others, which is the seventh house matter, right? So let's go over to let's look at his Navamsha chart. And his Saturn's exalted. Okay, so that's a pretty powerful Saturn.
Correct.
Saturn's also his Bhatt Karaka that has to deal with desires, ambitions. And if we look at his Saptamsha Dasha, Saturn's in the second house as well, so it's still pretty prominently placed heading towards its own sign. And we want to look at the D60 for Saturn. Saturn's in the same sign as it is in Saptamsha. The D10 we've already looked at. D10 is in its own sign. D12 is debilitated. Now, this is interesting because one of the things about Eisenhower was he wasn't considered a very, he was the president in the United States where the United States started to change. You know, especially in terms of civil rights and things like that. It was a slow change, but it started to change during his administration. So essentially, if we look at these charts just in isolation, you can see the Saturn Mahadasha is going to be important. Now let's look at Yogini, or let's look at another Dasha. Okay, so he's let's look at Shashotri because he qualifies for Shashotri. So Shashotri starts with a Mercury Mahadasha. Then it goes from that into a Jupiter Mahadasha. So during his rise to power, 1935 to 1948, he was in a Jupiter Mahadasha. But look at how this tells another story. He was in a conflict. Sixth house is a house of conflicts. 1938. So essentially, they'll show different things about the chart, but he was essentially, so he was in a rule. So Saturn is work effort. Okay. So the Vimshotri is saying one thing. This Mahadasha, Shotri, is saying another, but they're saying essentially a different aspect of the same thing because this is essentially a really difficult period in his life, right? It's a period. So he came out of it successfully, but it was still a struggle. Jupiter in Navamsha is in Aries, which again is a warlike Navamsha, and the D10 is in the first house. So this is where his career life would actually shine, 1930, in the late 30s. And also, if we look at the D12, see the D12, it's in the Jupiter Mahasha aspected by the moon. So this will make him a popular personality. Okay, well liked. Okay. And if we go to the 1948 to 1962 when he was president, that Saturn still pops up again. Okay, but it doesn't show an ascendancy without some struggle. Okay, but both major parties wanted him to run for president. That was what I was trying to say. It was interesting because the Democrats were after him to run for president, so were the Republicans, and the Republicans got him. And let's look at his chart. Let's look at his chart. Let's look at his Yogini Mahasha. Okay, so his Yogini Mahasha is a bit different. Okay, so he gets elected. So he gets to be commander-in-chief in 1936, exalted Mercury. Again, it's his intelligence, it's his people skills to get in that position. 1936, 1941 to 1947, just a lot of work. This is the war we're talking about. This isn't easy. And it was Saturn. Then Venus comes up. So Venus is with Ketu. Now people were after him to run. He really wasn't. But look at what indicator Venus is. It's a status indicator. Okay. So he really wasn't a political animal. He really didn't have any aspirations to become president, as far as I know. And in all these Mahadashas, Venus is conjoined with Saturn in the D. And in the D10, Venus is in the 12th house of public service. Whenever you're looking at a politician's chart, always look for. I'm not saying you, Vinayak, but essentially everybody should look at the 12th house because that's where you have to give up yourself to actually serve other people. And if you see Venus down here, Venus in this Navamsha is with an exalted Saturn in its own sign, along with Mars. So Venus will essentially give him good opportunities for growth. Now, Rahu is interesting, 1954 to 1962. Rahu is interesting. So Rahu is placed in his 10th house, house of career. He's a famous president, okay? Considered by some people to be a model of decorum. He had 2 heart attacks while he was in office. That's another interesting fact about him. So that Venus Ketu, when he assumed that position during this Mahadasha, he would have been susceptible to health problems. And I think from this chart, Venus aspects Rahu, and that Rahu would have given him the health issues. This was also the start of 1954, thereabouts, was the start of the civil rights movement in the United States. So you had a lot of conflicts. And let's look at this chart, Dasha. Okay, so 1932, he was in an Aries Mahadasha, 9th house. All right. Aspected by Venus and Ketu. Ketu is another significator for war. Aspected by Saturn. his career indicator planet is Mars. And so if we go from 1932 to 1940, Aries is prominent. Then Taurus is when he became famous as the commander-in-chief. Cancer is when he actually ran for the Mahadasha, which he ran for president in 1951. And basically, Cancer is his 12th house. Well, it's interesting, but why should a person be elected to a high position during a 12th house Mahadasha? Well, it's also his 12th house Mahadasha in the Navamsha chart. It's also the placement of Mars, which is his Alma Karaka planet. I'm sorry, which is his Almatia Karaka planet in Cancer. So a lot of these are pointing to a person giving up a lot of freedom. So the presidency is considered to be a very high prestige position, but you don't get privacy, you don't get rest, you don't get it's also a tough position. It's one of the toughest jobs in the world. Any president of any country, President Modi has an incredibly difficult job. So any chart, if you see a person with an easy chart, chances are they're not going to become president. Okay, chances are they're not going to assume a high position. Okay, and let's just go on one more chart because, like I said, I am a little bit crushed for time. My apologies.
Yeah, not an issue.
But these can be explored in great detail. Let's look at. I'm trying to find a female. Okay, so let's look at Whitney Houston, who was a well-known singer. I rather not find a catastrophic female. Well, yeah, I think we can balance out. I'm not anti-female. I just think her chart would be interesting. So let's see now. So she was a world famous singer. And so she has an Aquarius rising. And the ruler of Aquarius is in the 12th house. So again, this is a chart of a person who's a public personality. And the main reason I say that is because again, a lot of public personalities don't have really strong they'll have strong first houses, but they'll also tend to have prominent 12th houses because they have to travel a lot. They have to sacrifice a lot. Saturn aspects of the moon again, another combination for fame. So that's one of the default positions I go to for fame. Sun and Venus, she's a beautiful woman. Sun Venus combination, usually a combination for a beautiful woman. Moon Jupiter, renowned for her voice, very, very strong voice, very, very powerful voice. K2's in the 11th, untrustworthy friends. Mars aspects, K2, Mercury's in the 7th house, basically immature spouse. Okay. All right. So her Atma Karaka planet is Saturn. So again, the 12th house lord. So this is one of those times where the chart of self-undoing, the signification of the 12th house is the chart of self-undoing holds true. So she has Saturn in the 12th house, and she died fairly young. Okay. If we look at the Vimshotri Mahadashas, go to Vimshotri first of all. So 1978 to 1998, it probably would have been a period of a great deal of success for her because Venus is located in the 6th house. It's a competitive sign. But it also would have because Venus is in the sixth house, which is connected with eating bad foods, it would have also led to some degree of drug addiction or some degree of and also she has Mars in the eighth house, so this is a Mars affliction chart for sure. The other thing is, so this entire period between 1978 and 1998, incredible competition. People have to have strong sixth houses or strong 12th houses in order to succeed in the world. Yeah, that's just my humble opinion. And the other thing is, from her chart, so she's in her moon's in Revati Nakshatra, so it's rather a dreamlike nakshatra. It really isn't that much in touch with the world, and very spiritual. It's nice for spirituality, but in the second house, again, it'll give temptations to eat things that aren't good for you. And career indicator planet is Jupiter, so she'll be popular. The Jupiter Moon conjunction. So she's not an author, as the Jomini books, but she did publish music. And Jupiter Moon are in the same sign in her Navamsha chart in Aquarius. Her Karaka planet is Saturn in the seventh house. So again, more of a public life, but also a lot of image on her husband, who was a fellow named Bobby Brown, who was a very bad character, but very smart. And again, friends are not good friends. Venus is with Ketu. And one of the reasons I'm making a differentiation between Venus and Ketu, between her chart and Eisenhower's chart, is because Venus and Ketu gave Eisenhower health problems because it was located in the fourth house. Venus and Ketu in this house will give her friend problems. Okay, so they'll be glamorous, beautiful, but they'll be untrustworthy, basically. Okay, they might even steal from her. If we look at the next Mahadasha, let's look at, we'll look at another Mahadasha we'll look at Shat. Shot. Samadasha. Okay, so she starts life. So she rises to fame roughly during sorry about that. During Jupiter Mahadasha. Okay, so that's good. The Jupiter Mahadasha would have been good for her. 1984 to 1987. 1987, she hits this Mars Mahadasha, which leads to a sort of a downward decline. 1991 to 1996, she hits another period. 1990, another period of relative fame. 1996 to 2002 is a self-undoing Mahadasha for her. So you can see where certain things that don't show up from the Vimashotri Mahadashas will show up here. Okay. And let's go over here. See Yogini. See what Yogini was operating for her. She was born in a Saturn Mahadasha, so she was destined for hard work. Around 2023, 1987, 1991. So Jupiter Mahadasha, again, rise to fame. Mars, sort of the start of involvement with drugs. Mercury, 1991 to 1996. Then again, Saturn. So especially when two dashas cover the same period, that tends to underscore what's going on in the person's life. So that Saturn subperiod would not have been good for her based upon. So it's essentially like looking at harmonic charts. You're looking at different dashas which will apply to the chart. And if you have two dashas which are bad mahadashas, it'll usually produce bad results. Let's look at a couple more And so, and let's look at Saturn in this chart in particular. So career life, Saturn was, she was fairly well known career-wise. But Saturn's in the 7th house in Navamsha. That's kind of a death-inflicting position. And let's look at her Charadashas. Charadashas around 19. So she was born in 1963. So 20s, Aries Mahadasha. So again, it connects with skill acting, things like that. Aries goes through 1988. Then she has a Taurus Mahadasha. Taurus is when she starts to have personal problems. Okay. Gemini Mahadasha. Fame is too much for her. Rahu, so again, a lot of temptations.
Gemini.
Yeah. And then Cancer. Cancer is
Venus.
yeah. And again, it's the ruler of the 7th house, so it's a death-inflicting combination. If you look at this as well, Sun is in Ashlesha Nakshatra. That's usually a combination for not necessarily associating with bad types, but getting involved in success at all costs, basically. So I mean, she was driven to succeed from this chart, but the Sun was also a negative planet for her because it ruled the 7th house. But again, these charts, these aren't definitive. And if we go down to this Navamsha chart, the Sun's in this, so she was probably uncomfortable with fame. Sun's debilitated in the 10th house. She probably let other people tell her what to do. And 12th house, Sun's with Rahu. So essentially everything connected with the Sun is a little bit self-destructive in this chart. So these are essentially illustrations as to how you can use these things in cross platforms. You can look at a variety of these conditional Mahadashas, and they'll all tell you somewhat the same thing, but in different languages. And they'll emphasize different parts of the chart. But again, like I said, it's essentially like you see a lot of planets in favorable signs in the Vargas charts, or in unfavorable signs or unfavorable placements in the Vargas charts. Those periods will be either really favorable or unfavorable. The one thing that we haven't looked at for her, and we didn't look at for Eisenhower, was the D60. And the D60, again, we have to be sure this is really a good planet for her, but her D60 is Sun with Ketu in Taurus. The Lord of the 1st house is that Sun, Ketu, Mercury with Taurus. Now, that's not normally bad, but the Lord of the 1st is with the Lord of the 2nd. And Mercury's and her friendships in this chart aren't good. So let's see. Sun is Marut. Mars is Gulika, which is very unfortunate. So that's essentially a lot of hardship. Rahu is fairly auspicious. Rahu and Ketu are fairly auspicious. But the ascendant is interesting. The ascendant is in Marichi, which is a death-inflicting ascendant in this chart. So I think whenever you hit periods in which the Lord of the 7th is operative, she'll be more prone to accidental death. So all these things, and again, you can look at these things for family members. So let's say we want to look at the 4th house Lord for her, and look at where planets are from that particular sign. We can figure out prosperity patterns for her parents or for her or fifth house prosperity patterns for her children, or bad luck periods for her children. So there's a lot you can do with this kind of a system. Does that help, Vinayak?
Yes, sir. So it's very interesting. So I hope all of our audience will get benefit from this. And your instructions are very crystal clear. So obviously this is very helpful for us.
And keep in mind, I didn't look at these charts before the lecture. I always do. The reason I do that is because I want to illustrate the principle and then show you how they're operating in real time.
Yes. And like you have shown us by using multiple dashas, like Gemini Chardasha, Shashti Amshar Dasha, or many different dashas, Vimshotri dashas, Yogini dashas. So that is a good thing. So I have learned many things in this today's presentation, especially how to club multiple dashas in one chart by using multiple divisional charts. So that's very
I mean, if they're very far off from each other, there's something wrong with the birth time. I mean, I mean, if you see things happening which which should have, that's essentially an excuse to rectify. Because the birth time, but the birth time would have to be significantly off.
yes. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can be there. Okay, so that's all I have today. Is that good?
Yeah. So it's good, and I think short and simple presentation is good, so everybody can understand it. So
And
what will be our next
and,
topic?
and people can feel free to experiment with this at home and probably come up with other combinations which I haven't thought of because I haven't even used Jamini yogas. I haven't used yogas in the chart at all. It's a pretty bare bones. I haven't used Upagrahas. It's a pretty bare bones analysis that I've given.
Not use this Sarvashtak Varga. We can use it
Yep.
Sarvashtak Varga and Shadbal. So there are many parameters which we can use.
Oh yeah. And again, the more you use those, the richer you can make the chart interpretation. But again, like I said, there's a temptation to overanalyze charts. I think sometimes
Yes.
when basically you'll get a lot of information from using simple techniques. So I think, and that's and this is a pet peeve of mine with people, not necessarily having to use the outer planets. I have nothing against them, but saying this could not have happened without an outer planet influencing the chart. And this is these systems. The outer planets are definitely useful. I'm not saying a person shouldn't use them, but Jyotish itself in the systems that we've seen, and certainly you can add components to it, but in the systems we've seen, essentially do tend to show manifestations, and the outer planets, at least to my mind, just confirm what's already there.
True. And like, I will ask one simple question that is maybe not relevant to our topic. Okay, but like this Shadbal. Okay, Shadbala.
Yep.
So
Yep.
I have read in many books, they say, like, let's say, like in this case, Mars is a third house ruler. Okay.
Yep.
So let's say if Mars is a malefic planet. Okay. And
Yep.
in Shadbal, if it's weak, then in Prashna Marga, as per Prashna Marga, this Mars will not give malefic result because it's losing this trend. Sorry, I'm saying
Oh
wrong.
no,
Yeah.
oh
So
no, I think you're correct. I think malefic planets that are weakened will tend to be largely benefic for a person.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, so essentially, I mean, the houses they rule will not be strong.
No,
Okay.
Prashna Mark
Yes.
actually is saying something else. So
Okay.
I will correct myself. So Prashna Mark says, let's say if Mars is a malefic planet, okay.
Yep.
So if Mars is holding strength in Shadbal,
Yep.
okay, so it will deliver good result related to malefic. Like Mars is a Tamasic.
Oh, I see.
Okay,
Okay, I got you.
yeah. So if Mars is losing the strength, then it will deliver the evil result.
Oh, I
Is it
got you.
correct?
Okay. Yeah, okay. Well, we can. It's it's a matter of interpretation. I think st- planets that are strong in Shadbala or in other parts of the chart, they hurt. All right, this is my pet theory. They hurt living things before they hurt
Okay.
non-living things. So essentially, this might be bad for her brother.
Yeah. So like you are saying in terms of health. So if
Yep,
Mars is losing the strength, so it can harm the health.
yep. It can harm the health. It won't necessarily hurt her ambition. Okay, it won't necessarily hurt her skills.
Hmm.
Okay,
Hmm.
but it will hurt. It will hurt certain things like her her family. It will hurt relationships. It will hurt. Um, essentially, um, it won't necessarily hurt property. She'll have property,
Hmm. Hmm.
but 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 but, but if Mars and also usually planets in the eighth house will make a person seem sexy. That's one of the things that I learned seem attractive. That's one of the things I learned way back. And certainly at least from she was considered to be a beautiful woman uh, in her in, in her lifetime, but that Mars also can be very destructive
Correct.
to what she eats, to the things she eats. Okay, so yeah, I would agree with that, but the first place it shows is health issues with with the things connected. So if we're in the if we're the fifth house ruler, it would give her an unhealthy son. Sixth house ruler,
Correct.
unhealthy relatives. Seventh house rulers, unhealthy spouse. Those kinds of things. That would be the first thing that would be impacted.
Hmm. Hmm.
Other things which are non-material, and as a matter of fact, it did hurt her personal health because it hurt what she ate. Right.
Hmm.
So so she so it's no secret she had a drug problem. Uh, and I think that sometimes what happens in charts is we look at it and say, "Oh, Mars is bad. This person isn't going to have real estate, or this person isn't going to have fighter ambition," and that's not quite the way it works. It's those things. Those things are untouched, or they can be compensated for by other planets. In her chart, Venus looks like the strongest planet in Shadbala,
Yeah.
and
Venus is having maximum Shadbal. But
yep,
here Mars is also having more than 100. At the 117 also Mars is in Pushkar Navmansha.
yep, and Mars has, but Mars has destructive tendencies too, at least in the chart.
Correct.
Okay, okay. So so essentially, and I've seen this chart operate. I saw a person who had um, Mars in that house, Mars in Scorpio, and a planet in its own sign ends up is supposed to not hurt anybody. She
Hmm.
ended up in she ended up in jail for about 6 months for something she didn't do. You know,
Correct.
so I yes, so I think that the malefics for the certain different rising signs will give malefic tendencies regardless. So even Jupiter, if it rules bad houses, will give malefic results. You
Hmm.
know, but they won't be quite as bad as other planets. Like I personally consider to be Mars the most destructive planet.
That can be
Um,
possible because I think there's some mistake in this schedule. Because these are showing in the graphical form, but if
yep.
I calculate it manually, na, so Mars is not that much good because like in schedule, we talk in terms of rupa, RUPA. So
Yep.
we have to convert that schedule score ultimately into some score that we call rupa. That is the ultimate thing in schedule. So
Oh,
if
okay.
we yeah, so if we see in rupa terms, so Mars, Mercury is the most Mars and Mercury both are losing the strength.
Yep.
Mercury is one of the weakest planet in this chart.
Yep. And and again, to a certain extent, that's Moon is public image. Mercury tends to be common sense. You know, it tends to be like the rational indicator in the chart.
Moon is
And yes. So 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 Moon is Moon is in the second, so that's okay. It's in a definite fleeting house, but it's in the second, and it's with Jupiter, Lord of the second. So that's okay for public
hmm,
popularity. But I think overall, at least when you get charts like this, you never want to forget that Mars is considered the most powerful malefic in the chart. And I stick to Brihaparasha or Shastra. Brihaparasha or Shastra tends to view Mars as the worst malefic.
correct.
And from what I've seen, that's absolutely true because Mars acts quickly. You
Mars
know,
is now malefic. Also for this ascendant, Mars is a malefic, functional malefic.
yep. So it's a double malefic.
Yes. So being a
I mean,
malefic planet, losing the strength, it will definitely cause harm.
yep, yep.
Thank you, sir. This is a very interesting session. And today we have learned many things about this Varga charts and how to use it practically. And you have shown us two different charts. So thank you for this.